Can you negotiate pageant contracts? And even if you can, should you? I got sent this question by one of our VIPs late last week, beg your pardon. And by the way, if you ever have any questions like this, please send them to me, info@thepageantproject.com. You can request to remain anonymous if you so wish. That's the industry that we live in. Or you can also go to Pageant Pod, P-O-D as in podcast, pageantpod.com. But can you negotiate pageant contracts? And even if you can, should you? I'll start with the story, some of my experience. Now, I had a good friend who was an international title holder for a very, very big system. It's a very well-known system. It's not headquartered in the US or any of the Western countries. It's actually headquartered overseas. I won't disclose where. It was funny because she was having quite a miserable time at the pageant. And so she messaged me basically in tears, wanting some advice or basically needing someone to talk to. This is why I get called the pageant shrink all the time. It's because I feel like I'm the pageant therapist, basically. But I talked her through it. I think we had probably an hour-long call, maybe slightly longer. And at the end of the day, my advice to her, as simple as it was, right, at the end of an hour-long conversation was, look, you're there. You can't really leave. Whilst you're there, you might as well have some fun, meet some cool new people, see some new sights, and whatever happens, happens, right? It's not up to you at this point. Let go, let God, or whatever metaphor or saying you want to use. My advice worked a bit too well. She ended up winning the entire international pageant. I swear to God, this is true, right? This could only happen in pageantry. And I saw on Instagram that she had won. I was slightly surprised. So I messaged her saying, what have you done? I guess my advice worked a bit too well. Well, here's the thing. Never look a gift horse in the mouth, but things are never as simple as they seem. Put it this way. If you get an inkling that something is trouble in the pageant industry, or that something is not quite right, it doesn't sit well with you, and this may not even just be in the pageant industry. This will be those of you who have that sort of spidey sense, that sixth sense, when you just know that something is not quite right, something is off, and every time you have ignored that instinct, you have lived to regret it. Even though it may not be instant regret, it comes back to bite you in the butt big time. This was a case of that. So probably 3 to 4 months later, she was in tears again because the international director, the director of the international pageant, was an absolute tyrant, a bully, very, very abusive, would message her with messages that were basically verbatim, why are you so stupid? Why on earth would you do this? You're so stupid. You're useless. X, Y, Z, on and on and on and on. It got to the point where my friend, not that she didn't want to be the title holder, but although that was certainly on the table, so to speak, but she messaged me specifically about her contract, her international contract, and she sent it through to me. Now, for those of you who don't know, many times these contracts aren't supposed to be seen by anyone other than the person who signed them and the director. And yes, there certainly is something to be said for confidentiality of such agreements. But I don't think this is about professional courtesy. This very often in the pageant industry is about hiding terms and conditions that, let's say, border on the abusive and would never hold up in any self-respecting court in the world. And so I looked at the contract. I wasn't particularly optimistic about it. And sure enough, I look at it and the first thing that jumps out to me is every page is absolutely littered with spelling errors and grammatical errors. Now, you might say, big deal, so what? Well, the deal is this is a legally binding document. And you would think that if you were even vaguely professional, that you would at the very least run a spell check over your international contract that's supposed to be legally binding. Mind you, this is sort of before the days when AI had really taken off, but you still had spell check. And so immediately I'm concerned because this person obviously hasn't had the courtesy or hasn't had the respect to do things the right way, to do things properly. And I understand if you have a typo in your Instagram caption, we've all been there, but typos and grammatical errors, multiple errors in your contract, that's a no-no. But anyway, I looked at the contract and there were some terms in there that were downright extortionate. One that really jumps to mind was that the international pageant was claiming that they could claim a certain percentage of her income, my friend's income, for the next year. But it didn't stipulate that that only applied to work that the pageant had been directly responsible for getting her. So, for example, if that pageant had an existing relationship, let's say with a modeling agency, and as part of the prize package, my friend got to sign up with that modeling agency, and then that modeling agency got my friend paid work. And then you could argue, all right, for a period of however many years, a percentage of that work would go back to the pageant. Now, whether you agree with it or not, I can at least see the rationale behind that. But this contract didn't have any such stipulation in it. Now, why is that a red flag? Because if your brain works like mine, you'd realize without the stipulation about that income percentage only applying to work that the pageant had gotten for my friend, it blanket could apply to absolutely everything that she earned for the next year. So if she got a raise at her job, or she got promoted, or she started a new job, and she was an actress, let's say she landed a role in Hollywood or something like that, something that paid an awful lot of money, but these had nothing to do with it, nothing to do with the pageant. Put it this way, the pageant wasn't well known enough or well connected enough outside of the pageant industry to land her anything meaningful. But the way that the contract was worded, it basically said that everything you earn for the next year, we get to claim X percentage of. And by the way, it was a very high percentage. And so, as I mentioned, I got messaged last week about someone who was wondering whether it was possible to negotiate their pageant contract. And as it turns out, it was sort of around the same stipulations in the contract. So this one was about usage rights, digital usage rights, in perpetuity, for no compensation. So to put it in plain English, if you signed up for this pageant and you wanted this pageant, or maybe even if you didn't, maybe they make you sign a contract just for participating in the pageant. But let's say it's a winner's contract. And in that contract, it says, we, the pageant, get to use your digital likeness or your photos, your videos, your images, all of that stuff. We get to use your likeness in perpetuity for no monetary compensation. Now, that may not seem like a big deal to you, although I would really encourage you to think about it. But if you are working in the acting industry, the modeling industry, or foregoing even that, if you become well known enough, a celebrity, a billionaire, or both, you have to think your likeness, the rights to using your image really do matter, especially in the modern day world. We have not only social media and the internet, but now we have AI. It is your digital, let's call it sovereignty, is more important than it has ever been in the past. Because in this day and age, people can very easily make you look like you're saying anything. And so you need to own your own digital likeness, your own digital sovereignty. And so the way it was stipulated in the contract was, and I didn't see the contract this time to be clear, but the person who messaged me told me basically what the stipulation was. And so she was wondering whether she could negotiate that. And look, my response pretty briefly was, yes, you could negotiate it. And if it was me, I definitely would negotiate it. But here's the thing. Should you negotiate it? In pageantry. Not in life in general, in pageantry. Now, me, I'm kind of like a damn the torpedoes person. If you want me to sign a contract and it's giving up all the rights to my digital likeness, I'm sorry, you're off the table straight away. That's largely to do with the fact that I've built the Pageant project, which is a fairly well-known brand in the pageant industry. And I'm certainly not going to let you use my likeness to say whatever you want or to endorse whatever you want. And it's not even about monetary compensation at this point. It would be about, if you want to use my likeness for something, I want to double check every single use case. It's not about money, because it's not like if you get me to look like I'm endorsing or supporting something that I really disagree with, that, yeah, $1 million would be fine. It's not like that, because reputation really does matter. But the question is, if you see a contract, a statement, a clause in your contract, your winner's contract, and you disagree with it, should you negotiate it? Now, here's what I said. I said I would, but should you? I think your only option really is to, well, I mean, you could leave it completely alone and decide I'm not going to say anything. I don't like that, because I don't think change really happens in the pageant industry unless you guys, the contestants, stick up for your rights and for what you believe in. Now, that being said, I think there is a right way to go about this, or let's say a productive way to go about this. And then there's also a way that's probably not going to be so productive. So my advice was, you message, you email your director. I'd probably email more so than message to make it more professional and to also make sure there's a paper trail, so there's no doubts about who said what. So I would email. I'd probably try and get on a phone call, to be honest. If we're going to talk about contracts, that could be a Zoom call as well, something like that. And I would say, from a very neutral ground, hey, there are certain phrases or certain clauses in this contract that I'd like to ask you about. Would it be okay, respectfully, would it be okay if we got on a call to discuss them? I don't want to start any trouble, and if it turns out that we can't agree on terms, then I'll respectfully step away from XYZ pageant. Even that feels kind of pointed, and I know that there are some directors out there who, if they got that message from a contestant, they would say, well, you can go somewhere else, because they don't like having anything questioned or anyone even implicitly questioning their authority. I know you know the sort of person that I'm talking about. If it was someone like me who was in charge, though, and I got that respectful, neutral email asking about a contract, I would certainly take the call. And more than that, I would wonder why it is that, let's say, my contract was putting some stipulations in place that didn't seem fair. Now, you can argue about the definition of fair or not, but I'd like to think that my communication with my contestants would have been good enough that anything they saw in the contract would not have come as a surprise, and everything would have been discussed or been made apparent beforehand. This is one of the reasons why I want winners' contracts made available to you guys, the contestants, before the pageant. Way, way, way before. With the understanding that it has to remain confidential, right? That's fair enough. But presenting you with the contract 5 seconds before you have to sign it, and by the way, you have to sign it because otherwise you have to resign the title, and I'm pretty sure that's a definition of duress, and any contract signed under duress is immediately invalidated. And by the way, if you're a lawyer or you have legal knowledge, please correct me on this, but that's my understanding. If you are saying, here's a contract, you got to sign it right now, and if you don't, I'm going to give the title to your first runner-up, that's the very definition of duress. Everyone requires a period of time where they're allowed to review that contract, hopefully, if they want to, with professional help. But that's the way I'd view it. I would make my winner's contract, or at least I like to think that I would, make my winner's contracts available to the contestants way before the pageant, so that if they have a problem with it and we can't resolve it, I'm not wasting their time by having them compete in my pageant and they never would have won, or they never could have won. Because even if they placed first, there's no way they would have signed my contract. And so that's how I would approach it. And then when you get onto the call or into the physical room with your director, again, it is a negotiation, but approach it as a discussion. So if you're someone who gets hot-headed, or you're someone on the flip side who gets tongue-tied whenever she needs to stand up for herself, I'd say that this is a good chance to practice, because very often the real world is like that. If you're, for example, having to negotiate a raise at work, you will have to stand up for what you believe in, and you will have to talk about why you believe you are worth more than what you are currently getting paid. It's the same question that we have so often in interview. Why in pageant interview? Why should we pick you as our title holder? And by the way, that still, from my experience, is probably the number one question that gives contestants the biggest trouble answering. It's basically putting forward your case as to why you would be the best title holder. And so, can you negotiate? Yes. Should you negotiate? That's your judgment call. Because it's very real. If you are ever feeling that if you say something, or you put up your hand and say, hang on, what's this? Or I don't agree with this. If you are thinking that might lead to troubles for you later on in the pageant industry, I hate to say, sometimes it's true. I wish it wasn't, but for me to say it's not a problem would be blanket lying. It is definitely an issue that's ongoing in our industry. I'd like to think at some point we will largely eradicate it. I don't think we can ever eradicate that problem entirely, but we can at least largely overcome it. So if you're asking me, should I negotiate? That's your judgment call. If you're someone who's very happy to stand up for herself and you come from a place of, well, I don't need this pageant. I'd like to win it, and I love the environment, and I love what it stands for, but I don't need it. And so if that clause stays in the contract, then I'm not participating. If you're happy to state that, and by the way, more power to you. We need more attitudes like that in the industry, because that's what's going to force these directors and these systems to evolve their contracts so that they sort of align to some sort of a professional standard. Because, by the way, there is no professional standard when it comes to pageant contracts. The other thing I said to the VIP who messaged me, I said, unfortunately, there really are no boilerplate contracts in the pageant industry. There's no board of standards. There's no professional accreditation or anything like that. I do wish sometimes there was. I don't know how you'd start such a thing. But given that there is no sort of standardized contract, you guys do sort of have to go and stand up for yourself. You're going to have to bat for yourself, which again, is not a bad thing necessarily, because it's going to teach you some skills. Now, I will say, there is, I think her name is Attorney Heather on Instagram, and I know she is representing, or was representing, I haven't kept up with it, a former Miss USA contestant who I believe was taking Miss USA to court because she asserts that she was actually the winner and that it was changed not through the scoring, but basically by a behind-the-scenes decision that was made by the directors, and that the winner had actually violated the Miss USA contracts because she had competed in more than 2 Miss USA state pageants, and apparently you can only compete in 2. If you can do more than that, then you're ineligible. You're eligible to win. Ineligible, not eligible. You know what I mean. Anyway, and this was before Tom Brodeur's time, to be clear. This was under the previous leadership. Now, Attorney Heather, whatever you think of her, some of the things that she's done on social media, so basically arguing with or calling out Tom on social media and saying, hey, you said in this podcast that you were going to be about honesty, integrity, and, here's your chance to prove it. You might like that, and I certainly hope if you take on an attorney like that you're okay with her doing that. For me, again, my taste, this is something that's better done behind the scenes and kept professional wherever possible. Yes, there is a time to go all guns blazing. I don't think right after Tom had taken over Miss USA and basically had 2 weeks to organize the next Miss USA pageant, I don't think that was the time. And I also disagree with some of the things she said about it being his responsibility and it's a very finicky argument because you really have to read it, and you know what the law is like. It literally can be one word makes all the difference. But put it this way, you could go all guns blazing if you wanted to negotiate a contract. That is not my advice. I don't think that would ever be my advice. That's not the way I work. And I think if you go scorched earth, it ends up being more trouble than it's worth. I say this having been an advisor to a former Australian national contestant over here who ended up having to contract with an attorney. She did everything very professionally but didn't post anything about it. It was all done behind the scenes with the attorney sending professional correspondence, certified mail, or whatever that's called. And put it this way, my client, the one that I was advising, not my legal client because I'm not an attorney, but the one that I was advising, she got her way. I won't exactly say what her way was, but it went so well that she ended up, well, it went so well for her and so badly for the director at the time that that director ended up getting the boot from the system. So, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and there's no right way or wrong way. But if I was going to wrap this up, I would say, if the question is, can I negotiate a pageant contract? Yes, of course you can. You can do anything you want in life. It's about the consequences. So when it comes to should you, are you someone who's okay standing up for herself, dealing with a bit of conflict, and maybe being labeled a troublemaker, as untrue as it may be? Are you okay with that? If you're okay with that, go ahead. I'd still say be respectful, but go ahead. If you're someone who's deeply uncomfortable with conflict of any type, first off, I would ask you, why is that? Because maybe you do need to learn to deal with conflict a bit better and to stand up for yourself more. But if it's not a case of you just are so hesitant to confront anyone, and it's more a case of, you know what, this is more trouble than it's worth. I have my own things going on, and literally this little bit here, I can leave it or take it or leave it. I really don't care. In that case, leave it. Again, I will say there are no standardized contracts in pageantry that I'm aware of. Probably if you're in a system such as a Miss USA, then if it's run well, then probably the state franchises will all basically have, I'd like to say, a similar contract. It would be wild to me to think that one state has one contract, another state has another contract, and even as I'm saying this, I'm hugely aware that that's probably what's happening. But hopefully with, again, certain people in charge, hopefully that will be brought under a bit more control so that it's fair and transparent. So, can you? Yes. Should you? Up to you. But I think the moral of the story here really is, if that spidey sense of yours starts tingling, or you get that sixth sense kicking in going, something's not right here, I'd probably stay away. Because from my experience, as someone whose intuition has rarely been wrong, I would listen to that intuition. So I'll leave it there. Coming up on this Thursday evening, we've got our mock interview. So if you want to book in for that, pageantmock.com, Thursday evening, 8 p.m. EST, $19.99 per session. I think most of you guys know about that, but pageantmock.com. And as I said at the top of this episode, if you ever have questions like this, I love answering your guys' questions. So send me more. info@thepageantproject.com, or you can go to pageantpod.com. And if you want to remain anonymous, just let me know. Because I know a lot of the time with these sorts of questions, you really don't want to know that you're the one asking them. But these questions, these issues do need to be discussed, anonymous or not. So send them through to me, info@thepageantproject.com or pageantpod.com. Have a great week, and I'll speak to you next time.